Greetings from New York City and Columbia Business School Executive Education. I'm Scott Gardner, and I'm here today with Professor Joel Brockner for the Making Change Happen webinar. Before I introduce Joel, I'd like to go over a few quick logistics with you. As you'll see on your screen right now, a recording of this webinar will be emailed to you. If you'd like to tweet about this webinar, we encourage you to do so at CBS Exec Ed. And finally, and most importantly, if you have any questions, we encourage you to upload those into the Q&A box throughout the webinar, and Joel and I will get to as many of those as possible in the last 10 minutes. Thank you. Joel, it's great to be with you today. Joel Brockner is the Phillip Hettleman Professor of Business at Columbia Business School. He's an expert in organizational behavior, particularly in the realm of change. He teaches the MBA course, Managerial Decision Making, the PhD course, Individual and Collective Behavior in Organizations, and of course the program we've worked on many times together, our executive education program, High Impact Leadership. He is also the award-winning author of the book, The Process Matters. Joel, it's great to be with you today.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me in.
Very happy to be. So Joel, you and I, we've been in many classrooms together. We've worked together for many years. We've met hundreds, maybe thousands of participants. One thing I've seen as a through line is that many of the leaders that we've met struggle with change. But change is a very big topic. So for the purposes of our webinar today, when you talk about making change happen, what aspect of change are you talking about?
Well, primarily, Scott, about the implementation process. So I put on the screen a variety of organizational changes, downsizing, merger, acquisition, growth. You see the list. And indeed, while I have this list up in front, viewers at home might want to be thinking about what kind of change is going on in their organization. And so there's kind of a what aspect of change, but more importantly, there's a how. I would say that more often than not, changes fail not because they're the wrong idea. They're oftentimes the right idea, but they're just not very well implemented, not handled very well. And so, you know, we've probably, all of us in the room and outside have heard this expression, you know, the only constancy is change. Many times, right? Companies are dealing with it on a regular basis. It might surprise you.
We're all dealing with it on a regular, like life,
all of us,
right? Exactly.
all of us, including even in academia, right?
Exactly.
So no ivory tower here. We're subjected to those forces just like all of you are, you know, out there. It might surprise you to learn when it was first said, the only constancy is change. It was not Jack Welch when he took over at GE 40 years ago. It was not the French philosophers from 200-300 years ago. You'd actually had to go back to ancient Greece times, and it was not Plato, Aristotle, or Socrates, but rather Heraclitus, great poet, Greek poet and philosopher, said about 2,500 years ago that the only constancy is change. Now, I would argue that if anything, certainly in recent years, the nature of change has changed. I don't know if that proves Heraclitus' original point. I'll leave that to the philosophers, in the room. But I think it's safe to say that change has become more pervasive and more intense. And I say that in a couple of ways. You know, oftentimes when we ask people in our programs, what kinds of changes are you dealing with? Let me go back to that original list. People will say that they're dealing with multiple changes simultaneously. They're downsizing part of the organization, growing other parts, so it makes for a very frenetic pace of change. But also the time interval in between change events has shrunk dramatically. It wasn't that long ago when an organization would do one of these and then there'd be a period of calm for months, maybe even years. But now what I'm hearing more and more is that just when you're done with one, your boss is asking you to take on the other. You hear a lot about the expression change fatigue, right? And I think part of what makes change fatigue fatiguing is the fact that it happens not only so often, but also that it's not handled very well. And if only these changes were handled better, it wouldn't be so draining. It'd still be draining to some extent because it's the ongoing onslaught, right? But if it's handled better, there'd be a lot less change fatigue, I would predict.
And I think that also its change is probably more public now these days for corporations. I mean, it's very obvious when you're making change. It's felt, with just the reality of the world right now. People see that change happening. So not only for your organization do you have to do it well, you have to do it well for your customers.
Absolutely.
Because everybody is part of it.
It's very visible.
Exactly.
Right.
So when you talk about doing it better, you say doing it better. What matters by doing it better? What makes it better or worse?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So I would argue, and the research will back this up momentarily, that if you're talking about, first of all, what do we mean by it being handled better? Ultimately, it's in terms of the people on the receiving end of the change. To what extent are they engaged with the change? To what extent are they showing high productivity, high morale? And what factors make it go one way or the other? And these are the two sets of considerations that we found to matter. One, I think people quickly size up for themselves. What does the change mean for them?
Right.
Am I going to be better off or worse off? For example, if it's a relocation, did my commute time to work just get longer or shorter? Do I have
tangible?
Tangible,
right.
Even more tangible. Are my career prospects better as a result of the change?
Right.
Do I have a better boss? Is my work more interesting? So people quickly size up what it's going to mean for them, and no surprise, they're typically more engaged with the change if they think the outcomes are going to be favorable rather than unfavorable.
Right.
Now, you didn't have to go to Columbia Business School to learn that principle, but it does have important implications for anybody who's trying to make change happen. Part of what they need to do is convince as many people as possible what's in it for them, how they're going to be better off, not worse off, as a result of the change. So outcomes matter.
Yes.
One factor,
Yeah.
right? The other factor, and we've talked about this, you and I, Scott, many times, it's not simply the outcome, but also the process.
Right.
Was it handled well? Right. And that's really what we'll talk about in the remainder of our conversation
right.
today. What do we mean by a well-handled process? So more details on that, in a moment. But let me show you a summary, and we're really having, folks, we're having an evidence-based conversation here, because what I and my colleagues have done is go into organizations that are dealing with these kinds of changes, see how people, employees react as a function of the outcome factor that I alluded to, as well as the process factor. So this is across a wide variety of organizational change situations. So think of this as a kind of an artist's rendition of the results of many different studies. The higher the score, the better people are responding. Right. So different ways to look at the numbers. One quick summary is to say that you really don't want to be in a situation where you're giving people both a bad outcome and a bad process.
Right.
That's a very toxic mix. Okay. And there's an expression in everyday life for that. We call it adding insult to injury. But what our numbers suggest, what the research suggests, is that it's even worse. If you give people a bad outcome and you also don't handle it well, they respond particularly negatively, even more negatively than adding insult to injury.
Right, right.
It's more like multiplying insult times.
It's almost unacceptable.
Almost
like to the point
unacceptable.
of unacceptable. I'm going to leave this organization.
I'm going to leave this organization, or if it's in a downsizing situation, I'm going to be suing this organization. Right. Right. For example, one of the strongest predictors of whether people who are laid off will sue, so it's always a bad outcome, is whether they felt that they were handled respectfully at the time that they were given the bad
right.
news.
And that's a choice a leader can make. We say that, and it seems to me, when I hear that, I've heard that many times over the years, you say this in these classes, and I see people write down that note. Mm-hmm. And I do think that, it's an important distinction that you have the command over that. You may not have the command over the downsizing.
Correct.
But you do have the command.
Correct.
So this is giving power.
Correct, very much so, and that's want to be one of my penultimate wrap-up points, is that the expression "you can't satisfy all the people all the time." Right. That's truer for outcomes, right? You can't make a choice about how many people are going to keep their jobs, right. But you do have under your control the ability to handle the process well.
Absolutely.
Right. So really, one of the main takeaways from this matrix of research findings is that when you have to be the bearer of bad news, right? Do whatever you can to handle the process well, because if you don't, then people are very aggrieved, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And to be, truth in advertising, if you're giving people a bad outcome and you handle the process well, you'll get kind of a lukewarm response. They're not going to come hugging and kissing you and say, "Oh, you screwed me, but you did it in such a high quality way." They're not mm-hmm. going to have that type of reaction. They'll have more of a lukewarm reaction, like a 5 on a scale of 1 to 10.
Right.
But what's the alternative? If you don't handle it well, you'll get a 1, and then they want to wring your neck, then they're suing right. you and right. particularly aggrieved.
And it's unnecessary destroying somebody's, person. You know what I mean? It's unnecessary to go to that point when you have the command to not.
Correct.
I mean, I see no reason for it.
Correct. Correct. And that's a puzzling point. Oftentimes the expression "a little bit can go a long way." Small details in how you handle bad news can have a major impact on right. how it's received.
Great. Great. All right. So that comes to my next question for you, is that we've heard many times that a person, and we've just talked about it, they question whether even good change is good or bad for them. I feel like it's the unknown. Mm-hmm. It's not just the literal, like I have to drive longer to work or something, but it's the unknowns that scare people. So is that good or bad for them? And you talk a lot about the importance of process. The name of your book is The Process Matters. So can you talk more regarding what actually is a well-handled process?
Yeah, no, right, absolutely. So it's one thing to show the research findings, but what do I mean by that? What does the field mean by that? And I'm going to give kind of an overarching model, if you will, and then give specific examples of each one of these, yes. Right? So you'll see that I've underlined the word, the letter S in agents, right? It takes a village, right? There's too much to do. If you're talking about the implementation process, it can't possibly be done by one person. It requires a series of actors working in a coordinated way, doing the things that are mentioned on the screen. Right. So you have to make the case for change, talk about what's wrong. I call that surfacing dissatisfaction with the status quo. The old saw, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. People need to be convinced that things are either broken and therefore need fixing, or even if they're not broken, Scott, it could be that we're doing okay where we are, but we could be doing so much better. Right. So we should be dissatisfied about the money we might be leaving on the table by not doing things better. Right. So we have to surface dissatisfaction with the status quo. But if you only talk about what's wrong, gaps, ways in which we're not doing what we ought to be doing, you might be seen as overly negative, a wet blanket, hardly the stuff of inspirational change leadership. So you have to show people a better alternative, and that better alternative is captured by the V word, a vision of the future state. Right. So we should be satisfied with where we are. And here's a better place for us to go. I'm giving you a better alternative. Then we have to have a process to help people transition from the dissatisfying current state to the better future state. It's point number 3, P for process. And then we need to recognize that people will oftentimes resist change. They experience the change as costly, and therefore resist it. So part of what astute change agents do is they figure out what the bases of resistance are, what the costs are to individuals that are making them resist the change, and then reduce the costs, thereby reducing their resistance. Right. So if you can do all 4 of these things, and what I mean by you, the series of change agents, the collective set of actors, then change will be embraced, we'll get kind of positive responses. Right. Unfortunately, this is one of these models where if any one of these elements is not handled well, then change is unlikely to be embraced. Right. D times V times P, 100 times 100 times 0 is still 0. Right? So it's still, every one of these elements needs to be handled well.
And is there any element is it equally balanced? Or is there one that you feel is?
Yeah, I would say they're all important. And that question often comes up, well, if you only had one, which one would you go to?
And you just don't want
and I wouldn't even answer that, because what I would say is that if any one of them is not handled well, people are likely to be. Exactly. It breaks the chain. Yeah. So that's the overall model. But let me talk more specifically about what we mean by D, V, P, and C. So an example of surfacing dissatisfaction with the status quo is talking about what we do well, what we do less well, because if you can do that, then it puts you in a position to provide context to people. Item number 1, and I'll explain what we mean by these different items in a moment. I clearly describe to people why the situation as it exists prior to the change is not acceptable. If you're strong in the ability to analyze the need for change, then it puts you in a situation where you can provide good explanations. And one of the things we know from research, as well as I think common sense, if people feel like they've been given a sense of context, why things are being done, they're much more likely to get on board. Right. By the way, so item number 1, and you'll see other item numbers, refers to this change implementation survey, different items from the survey, specific examples of best practices that we will make available to you, after the session. So D for dissatisfaction, V for vision. I've defined vision as you see on the screen. And part of what we need to do in managing the vision aspect is remind people of the common vision throughout the change effort. It is not like you say it once and then sit back as a change agent and watch people move towards that better future state. No, people need constant reminders of kind of the eye on the prize type of thing.
Right.
What are we headed towards? Maybe find different ways to send that same message. But it's an ongoing communication effort. Communicate, communicate, communicate very much applies to the vision aspect of a change effort. And then an example of process, helping people to separate from the past. So again, an example of this would be item number 10 from the survey. When telling people about the need to change our current practices, I show respect towards those practices that have served us well in the past. And it's almost a little counterintuitive because you're introducing change, you're moving away from how we've done things before, but you're also wanting to honor and respect it rather than dismissing it.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes people who have been around for a while have a stake in how things were done.
Well, they feel it's a comment on their work, their excellence, that they put into it, and it, was a time that was important.
Absolutely.
And you can't diminish that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because if you disrespect how we were doing things, then people feel disrespected in the ways that you just described.
And it's interesting, when you talk about this separating from the past, and we've seen this question come up, many leaders we've talked to, they'll say, people are having a hard time separating from a bad process, in the past, just because at least I know it. So the more information they have, the more you talk about it, the more you're, like you said in the last slide, to keep them involved, then it becomes less of a mystery.
Yes.
Because what's worse, a bad process that you know, or a process that you don't know anything about?
Yes, absolutely. So keeping people in the loop, informed. Right. There's two reasons to explain why or provide information. One is the more obvious one, kind of the informational value.
Right.
Like, I didn't get why we're doing this, but now that you explain it to me that way, Scott, I can make the case, I can understand it, I'm more on board.
Right.
But there's also a symbolic message. When you give people an explanation, it's not just the information, but the symbolic message is that you cared enough about them to give them a good explanation.
Absolutely.
And when people feel cared about, treated respectfully, they're much more likely to get on board with whatever the decision happens to be.
And I would venture to say that that's more difficult for a new leader in an organization.
Yes.
Than and a leader that's been there for a while, has been part of it, still may want to separate themselves from the past. But a new leader has a very new set of eyes looking at past processes.
Correct.
And so they've got to work very hard to honor that past while still carving a path forward.
That's right. I've seen emotionally tone-deaf leaders who will sometimes go in there and say, the ways we've done things around here are just really screwed up. On my watch, things are going to be done in a very different way.
I'm here to save you and from all this, and it doesn't go over.
It doesn't go over well because, again, the people who had a stake in the ground for things being the way they were, as I said earlier, are feeling very much disrespected.
Absolutely.
So great point about the new leader having to be particularly astute and interpersonally sensitive. And the last point, again, we talked about D, V, P, and now C, reduce the costs of change. And oftentimes, people will be resistant to change because they feel like they're being taken out of their comfort zones, right? And so, we can have some empathy, can and should have some empathy around that. They're used to doing things in a certain way, and we need to recognize that if we're asked to do something new, we're going to be awkward about it at first. So part of what I think a well-managed change process entails is that if it's new skills that people are going to have to exhibit as a result of the change, item number 32, giving people opportunities to learn or be trained in the new skills required by the change effort. Allowing them to practice, sending them to a training program, whatever it is that they need to do in order to be able to get up to speed.
And have feedback. Provide feedback. In other words, our colleague Willie Peterson always says that, the decision is made, you take all the information you can get, and that includes feedback from the people who've been part of the organization. But once the decision has been made, that's when the decision is made. But until then, you've got to do all of this in order to get people on board with the change.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise you're just, even if it's a good change, if you haven't done all this, really the key takeaway is that people are just going to stop. What's the quote? It's like, people will do a why if there's a good how, or they'll do a how if there's a good why, but you have to keep reiterating that over and over.
Correct. You have to give them the why, as Nietzsche said, and then once you give them the good why, then you put them in a position to make it happen.
Right.
And part of making it happen means training them, equipping them, not only motivating them, but giving them the skill set needed to be able to do the new behaviors that are called for by the change.
And they feel like they're part of that change.
And they feel like
they're
part
not
of it.
just being changed.
Correct.
They're part of the change.
Correct.
But again, we've seen it year after year after year. These questions come up of people who just don't know this process, and they're in a position of leadership, and it's not because of bad intentions. They simply don't know the process, and that's why I'm very a process-driven person. I know you are too. I like this. So, all right. Would you like to take some questions from our audience? All right,
Love
great. So our first question is from Sam. How do you manage convincing those that are indignant, that are not accepting of change, even when you've gone through this process? What do you do at that point?
Well, the indignance speaks to probably some core issue. Right. So part of what you need to do is get behind the indignance. There's a distinction made in negotiations literature between a position and an interest. A position is where people stand, the indignance. The interest is the underlying reason why. So once you move the conversation away from their indignance, but and you might have to use the same sentence, the same request to those people in different ways. Tell me a little bit more about what's behind your indignance. Where are you coming from? Or even, more point blanketly, why are you being so indignant? Not necessarily said in an accusatory way. Again, the process matters. But once you can get the conversation to where they're coming from, with their indignance, you're in a better position to try to address it.
I agree, and I think also, and you do a lot of coaching. The idea of looking at an individual, knowing their social style, knowing the way that they will respond. It's sort of like, are you losing weight to get healthy, or are you losing weight to not die? That's a very different philosophy in somebody's mind. So to know an individual person and to be able to go through this individually, do you recommend that too? So that you get to know your team in a way that, there's a process, but the process must have individuality, I would think.
Absolutely. So I'm, this change implementation survey, for example, has 34 best practices. But part of what being an astute change agent means is, tailoring them to the individual when possible. Sometimes you don't have the time to do so, but the way in which you might try to, for example, get people to adopt change is, for some people, they like to know what's the upside. For other people, they want to know what's the downside of failing to adopt the change. Some people play to win. Some people play to not lose, right? And that you might want to tailor your messaging differently depending upon whether you think they're more of a play to win type or a play to not lose type.
And that takes work on the leader's part.
Absolutely.
They have to consistently evaluate and, like we say, analyze the audience. They have to analyze the audience.
You have to know your, it's the old saw, you have to know your audience. And so it is in trying to make change happen as well.
Great. Okay, this is from Paul. Is there a reward structure for those who make the conversion to bring others along?
Say more about what you mean by reward structure.
Well, is there like a sort of like a carrot? Is there something that you would say, like, once you get to this point in the process, this is what's going to happen? Is there promotion based? Is it, Is it fear based? Is it like, what do you, what do you get them to move to each of these steps?
I see. Yeah. Well,
I think that's what Paul's asking. That's what I'm.
Yeah. No, I think that part of this whole idea of helping them to kind of get on board with it. Right. And there's different kinds of rewards. One is you could say, look, if the organization moves towards the vision of the future, not only is the organization going to be better off, but here's how you're going to be better off. Right. So you can tie individual outcomes to organizational outcomes.
Absolutely.
Right. You can also.
I think this is a very important point. Because I think a lot of times when people talk about change, they talk about the benefit to the company, which is obviously important. But they don't maybe miss the mark on not talking into the individual benefit to the person.
Correct.
To say, like, we're going to go to be from a $30 million company to a $100 million company, isn't that great? And people say no change in their lives.
Right.
or their reality, then it's very hard to sell that.
Right.
Because where's that
Absolutely.
going to?
Right. So here's what's in it for you.
Right.
If we the organization were to achieve what the change is trying to accomplish.
Right.
But related to that, I would say, in terms of getting them on board, is to try to show how what they do contributes to the effort.
Yes.
Right. What I call the leader as dot connector. So here's what we're trying to achieve. Here's what you do. Right. And here's how what you do helps us get to what we're trying to achieve.
And do you shine a light on that so other people see it, sort of like social proof?
Social proof.
You know.
Other people see it, absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
But oftentimes when you're doing your work, you lose track of the broader context, the broader vision in change efforts, in particular. You feel like you're kind of just doing stuff, and it's really the work of leadership to be the dot connector, to help people see the relationship between what they do and that broader sense of vision. Yeah. So it's not only what's good for the organization is good for the individual. It's also what the individual does has a direct line relationship towards achieving the hoped for vision.
Yeah, yeah. It's just that holistic being part of being part of this change. I mean, it's got to be 360.
Correct.
It just has to be 360, and this is the right. Jose asks, change in organization affects job security. How to be sensitive to implement change with ethical standards. So you talked about lawsuits, and you talked about like this. When people, I think people's first reaction, and I'm gathering from his question, that when people hear change is coming, the first thing they hear is downsizing, right?
Yes,
and
often.
What are your comments on that? Like, how do you? That may not be the case. In fact, you may be growing the business. You may be just taking it into new roles. So what do you provide to people when there is going to be downsizing? And what do you say in the beginning to assure people that there won't be? I mean, it's two different realms.
Right, right. Well, you have to be honest, obviously. Again, this question of ethicality. We're tempted to want to say, we at senior levels of organizations might be tempted to want to reassure people that their jobs are not going away, but sometimes it's wishful thinking. Right. So, if you want to be ethical, tell it like it is, right? But not only tell it like it is, don't try to cover it up, be transparent, be upfront, but also when it comes to delivering that bad news, then you have to be as respectful as possible. Right. I said that earlier, that I made noted the research finding earlier, which says that one of the strongest predictors of whether people will sue for wrongful termination is how respectfully they felt they were treated at the time that they were given the bad news. Right. And that has a very economic sound to it. Like advice to the company, be respectful, because then you don't have to deal with disgruntled ex-employees in a court of law. And there's an economic imperative, but there's also an ethical imperative here. Right? That if you treat people in a respectful way when you're delivering bad news, it's just ethically the right thing to be doing. And oh, by the way, it will help your bottom line.
Exactly. And if you're struggling with that ethical, or struggling with being kind about this change, then you have a process.
Correct.
If you can't find it in yourself, then you can find it in a process.
Correct. That's right. See earlier discussion of DVPC.
Yeah, exactly.
Correct. Absolutely.
All right. So we have about 2 minutes left. We've gotten some great questions. We'll continue with those as always, and the conversation continues, which we'll tape and send that to you by email. But Joel, I know you had a few wrap-up comments for us.
Yes. So really 3 of them. So one is to, as what I say, use the survey and the organizing framework as a checklist of action steps. So the organizing framework is this DVPC model. The survey gives specific examples of best practices. So again, we'll make that survey available to you. And whenever you're going through change, you can really use this survey as things to think about whenever you're trying to handle the process well. The survey also gives you an opportunity to rate yourself as a change agent. So you could do some self-assessment as to what you think you do well versus less well. And not only for you as an individual change agent, but you could think of the series of actors in your organization who are in charge with trying to make change happen, not only what do you do well, what does the group do well? Are we stronger at D? Are we weaker at V? Do we handle some aspects of P better than others? You can actually get this information by having the survey distributed and completed by a handful of change agents, within your organization. And my most kind of almost philosophical takeaway, this third point, that during times of change, you change agents often have a lot of control and influence power. That is, in times of change, there's a lot of uncertainty. And when there's uncertainty, people are looking for direction and guidance. And so if the change agents are handling the process well, they can be very powerfully influential in getting people on board. They might even be more influential in a change context than they would be in a more steady state environment when there's less uncertainty and people are less looking for direction. So the implied message is you have a lot of control. You change agents really do have a lot of control and influence power. And I strongly encourage you to adhere to the tenets of the DVPC model.
Great. All right. And last, like Joel said, the Change Implementation Survey, we'll make that available to you. It's a very useful tool in making change happen well. And Joel, thank you so much. So great to be with you today. We've worked together for many years. And I really I know that when people take the High Impact Leadership Program, these questions are weighing on them. And I think when something is weighing on you, to have a process that works, and we've gotten feedback that it does work. So I thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure, Scott. Thanks for having me in.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for being with us today. Talk to you soon.